The appointment had been scheduled under the name M. Rivera, but Diego Santos thought nothing of it. Rivera was a common name in his neighborhood. But as he cut his client's hair, Diego noticed the man's intense focus on the family photos covering the barbershop walls. When the customer's eyes stopped on a particular picture, Diego at age 8 with his beloved grandmother, the man's breathing became labored. "That boy in the photo," he said, his voice barely steady, "he looks just like my nephew who I lost 20 years ago." Diego's hand stopped moving. His last name used to be Rivera too. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Santos Barbershop, casting warm light across the vintage chairs and mirrors that Diego Santos had lovingly restored when he opened his shop 5 years ago. Located in the heart of East Los Angeles, the small barbershop served a neighborhood of working families, elderly men who remembered when the area was different, and young fathers bringing their sons for their first haircuts. At 32, Diego had built more than just a business. He'd created a community gathering place. The walls were covered with family photos, both his own and pictures that longtime customers had contributed over the years. There were wedding photos, graduation pictures, images of children and grandchildren, military service portraits, and memories of family celebrations. Diego believed that surrounded by these images of love and family, his customers felt more at home. Among the photos was one that Diego treasured above all others, a picture of himself at age 8, sitting on his grandmother Rosa's lap in her small apartment. Both of them were smiling at the camera, Diego missing his 2 front teeth, Rosa's weathered hands resting protectively on his shoulders. It was one of the last photos taken before the car accident that changed everything. Diego's life had been divided into 2 distinct chapters, before the accident and after. Before, he had been Diego Rivera, living with his mother Carmen and visiting his grandmother Rosa every weekend. His father had died when Diego was 3, but his mother's love and Rosa's wisdom had made him feel secure and cherished. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday evening when Diego was 8 years old. Carmen had been driving home from her job at a textile factory when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. Diego, who had been at Rosa's house that night, suddenly became an orphan with no clear path forward. What followed was a bureaucratic nightmare that tore the family apart. Rosa was in her 70s and suffered from diabetes and high blood pressure. Despite her desperate desire to raise Diego, social services deemed her too old and too sick to be a suitable guardian. Diego's only other relative was his uncle Marcus, Carmen's older brother. But Marcus was in the middle of a messy divorce and struggling with his own life crises. The social worker had explained the situation to 8-year-old Diego in language he couldn't fully understand. "Your uncle wants to take care of you, but he needs to get his life stable first. You'll stay with a nice foster family until he can provide a proper home." That temporary arrangement became permanent when Rosa died 6 months later, and Marcus seemed to disappear entirely from Diego's life. The boy was shuffled between foster homes. His last name eventually changed to Santos when he was adopted at age 12 by Maria Santos, a kind woman who gave him stability but couldn't fill the hole left by his lost family. Diego had spent years wondering about his uncle Marcus, creating elaborate fantasies about why he'd never come back. Maybe Marcus had died too. Maybe he'd moved far away and couldn't find Diego. Maybe he'd simply forgotten about his sister's son in the chaos of adult problems. Now, 24 years later, Diego had built a life he was proud of. The barbershop was thriving. He owned a small house 3 blocks away, and he was engaged to Isabella, a teacher at the local elementary school. But he never stopped wondering about the family he'd lost, about the uncle who might still be alive somewhere in the city. The appointment for 3 p.m. had been made by phone, with a voice that sounded educated and professional. M. Rivera had requested Diego specifically, saying he'd heard good things about the shop from a friend. Diego had assumed it was another professional who worked downtown but lived in the neighborhood. When the customer arrived, Diego was surprised by his appearance. The man was in his 50s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, and clearly successful. He seemed out of place in a modest barber shop, but he greeted Diego politely and settled into the vintage barber chair with apparent comfort. Just a trim, the man said. Clean up the sides, leave some length on top. Sure thing, Diego replied, draping the cape around his customer's shoulders. I haven't seen you around the neighborhood before. You new to the area? No. I used to live around here a long time ago. I've been meaning to come back and explore the old neighborhood. As Diego began working, he noticed the customer's eyes wandering around the shop, taking in the family photos that covered every available wall space. Most clients enjoyed looking at the pictures. It gave them something to focus on during the haircut and often sparked conversations about their own families. But this customer's attention seemed more intense, more searching. His eyes moved methodically from photo to photo, as if he was looking for something specific. You have a lot of family pictures, the man observed. Some are mine, some belong to customers, Diego explained. I like people to feel at home here. These photos remind everyone that this is a place where families are important. The customer nodded, but Diego could see him continuing to study the images. When a man's gaze settled on the photo of Diego with his grandmother, his entire body tensed. That picture, the customer said, his voice suddenly strained. The little boy with the older woman. Who are they? Diego glanced at the photo his customer was staring at. That's me when I was 8, with my grandmother Rosa. She raised me for a while after my mother died. The customer's breathing became labored, and Diego could see his hands gripping the arms of the barber chair. Your grandmother's name was Rosa? The man asked. Yes, Rosa Rivera. She was my mother's mother. Why do you ask? The customer was quiet for so long that Diego stopped cutting and stepped around to look at his face. The man's eyes were filled with tears, and he seemed to be struggling to speak. What was your mother's name? He whispered. Diego felt a chill run down his spine. Something about this conversation was taking a turn that made him deeply uncomfortable. Sir, is everything okay? You look like you're not feeling well. Please, the man said urgently. Your mother's name. What was it? Carmen Rivera. She died in a car accident when I was 8. The customer let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He reached up and pulled the cape away from his neck, standing up from the chair, so quickly that Diego stepped backward. Diego, the man said, staring at him with an intensity that was frightening. Is your name Diego Rivera? It used to be. I was adopted when I was 12, so my name changed to Santos. Sir, you're scaring me a little. How do you know about my family? The man's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. Because Carmen was my little sister. Because I'm Marcus Rivera. Because I've been searching for you for 20 years. Diego felt the world tilt around him. The scissors in his hand clattered to the floor as he stared at this stranger who claimed to be his uncle. The uncle he'd wondered about, dreamed about, and eventually given up hope of ever seeing again. That's not possible, Diego said, his voice barely audible. My uncle Marcus disappeared. He never came for me. I never disappeared, Marcus said through his tears. I tried to get custody of you after Carmen died, but I was going through a divorce and the court said I wasn't stable enough. They told me it was temporary, that I could apply again once my life was more settled. Then why didn't you? Marcus sat back down heavily in the barber chair, his face in his hands. Because by the time I got my life together, you had disappeared. I went to the foster home where they'd placed you, but you weren't there anymore. They said you'd been moved, but because I wasn't officially your guardian, they wouldn't tell me where. So you gave up? I never gave up, Marcus said fiercely. I hired private investigators. I posted your photo on every missing person's website. I went to schools, churches, community centers. I spent thousands of dollars and 20 years of my life trying to find you. Diego stared at this man who claimed to be his uncle, trying to reconcile the wealthy stranger in the expensive suit with his childhood memories of Uncle Marcus, who used to take him to baseball games and bring him comic books. How do I know you're really him? Diego asked. Marcus wiped his eyes and looked directly at Diego. You have a scar on your chin from when you fell off your bike at Rosa's house. You were 7 years old, and you were trying to show off with a neighbor girl, Maria. You cried more from embarrassment than from pain. Your mother was so mad at me for not watching you more carefully. Diego's hand automatically went to the small scar on his chin, hidden now beneath stubble, but still there after all these years. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Marcus said. I remember that you loved Superman comics and chocolate ice cream. I remember that you wanted to be a police officer when you grew up. I remember that you used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from Dodgers games. Uncle Marcus? Diego whispered, the reality finally sinking in. Yeah, kiddo, it's me. They held each other and cried in the middle of the barbershop. 20 years of separation and loss pouring out in that small space, surrounded by family photos and memories. I thought you forgot about me, Diego sobbed. I thought about you every single day, Marcus replied. I never stopped looking for you. When they finally separated, Marcus looked around the barbershop with new appreciation. You built this. 5 years ago, I learned the trade in high school, worked for other people for a while, then saved up enough to open my own place. Carmen would be so proud. She always said you were going to do something special with your life. Tell me about her, Diego said. I remember some things, but I was so young when she died. They spent the next 3 hours in that barbershop, Marcus filling in 20 years of missing family history, while Diego finished the haircut that had started as a routine appointment and become the most important encounter of his life. Marcus explained how his divorce had dragged on for years, how he'd struggled with depression and guilt over losing Diego, how he'd thrown himself into building a successful business partly as a way to cope with the pain. He'd never married again, never had children, pouring all his energy into searching for his lost nephew and building the financial resources that would allow him to provide for Diego if he ever found him. I have a trust fund set up for you, Marcus said. College money, a house down payment, whatever you need. I know you're an adult now and you don't need a guardian, but I wanted to make sure I could help you build the life you deserve. I don't need your money, Uncle Marcus. I have a life I'm proud of. I can see that. This place, what you've built here, it's beautiful. But I'd like to be part of your life now, if you'll let me. Diego looked at the photo of himself and Rosa, the image that had started this incredible reunion. Grandma Rosa always said family finds a way back to each other, even when everything seems impossible. Smart woman. I wish I'd listened to her more when she was alive. She would have loved knowing you never stopped searching. 6 months later, Marcus Rivera walked his nephew Diego Santos down the aisle at Diego's wedding to Isabella. The ceremony was held in the same church where Carmen's funeral had taken place 20 years earlier. But this time, it was a celebration of new beginnings rather than an ending. In his wedding speech, Diego thanked the man who had taught him that family is worth searching for, no matter how long it takes or how impossible it seems. My uncle Marcus spent 20 years looking for me, Diego said to the gathered guests. He never gave up, even when everyone told him I was impossible to find. He taught me that love doesn't disappear just because people do, and that sometimes the most important appointments are the ones we don't expect. Marcus kept getting his hair cut at Santos Barbershop every month, not because he needed to, but because he never wanted to take for granted the miracle of having his family back. And Diego added a new photo to his collection on the wall, a picture of himself and Marcus on the day they were reunited, proof that sometimes the people we're looking for are hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to find them in the most ordinary moments of our lives. The Rivera family learned that love is patient, that family is forever, and that sometimes the most important discoveries happen not when we're searching, but when we're simply doing what we love, surrounded by the memories that make us who we are.